I'm on the go.
How y'all doing, man, brother? I have to deal with one of my brothers, one of my spiritual advisors, man, and I advise all of y'all to get some gold water in your life right here, man, to help your mind out. Get crown. I took my crown off today, man, but I put my headband on, but I will be wearing my crown. And when I'm in the studio, I'll be off this gold, man. I hit this and I just be freestyling. I ain't gonna lie. At first I thought it was BS, man, but it really do something to you. It kind of elevates your thoughts to another level, and I had to do my research on it, man. So your gold water, make sure y'all go check this out. My brother, man, 19keys.com. It's serious.
Goldwater.com.
Today is like a Groundhog's Day. It is a day that consistently reminds us, like Friday the 13th. It is a day connotated with energy. It's a day that one can live in the past and be re-triggered by an event and live out the same emotion. So it's a day that recycles time. In order for us to move forward, we have to not be in a state of reaction. We have to move forward, but that requires first a deeper interpretation and understanding. As one would say, the ultimate goal for us is to move into a God consciousness and develop enlightenment that will empower us and make sure that we can never be stepped on again by any elitist agenda. If one is to believe that the collective agenda of white supremacy and white patriarchal intellect has organized a grand scheme event through the utility of media, politics, Kabbalicism, ritualism, esoteric knowledge, military might, illusionist, Illuminati, whatever it may be, if we believe that such paradigm is to exist, then one must, for one, acknowledge the grand intellect of those who put it together, and also acknowledge that any such agenda requires a collective organization. And if one is to organize behind a collective agenda, one must look at that in sheer admiration and say, how come the devil can work together but the gods can't? Because I always tell people, the biggest difference between the Egyptians and any other civilization was their ability to organize and work together. They had the most successful regime of organization, which made them one of the greatest civilizations to ever exist. White supremacy has a very great, successful organization all across this planet Earth. If one is to believe that the grand scheme behind those people who behind the curtains can orchestrate such events, then you must ask yourself, how come we can't do the same thing? So the question doesn't, the answer doesn't lie in us noticing the tricks. The answer lies in us learning how to utilize those for our righteous purpose so that we can regain power of who we are. So as I go into my 19 keys, I'm a deep researcher. And most of the things that I research, a lot of times I don't have the ability to always articulate here on this platform because they go into a much deeper study, and the average person's mind is too distracted and doesn't have enough energy to importancize the information for their vision. Most people can only importancize information for their short-term thinking. So we wait on particular days like this, 9/11, when a person's mind is pierced back into the triggering of such an event, that a person can release certain information and allow you to move forward in understanding why 9/11 was such a big event, one of the biggest events in the last 100 years or even more, because it represents an entirely new time. Now, in order to stand 9/11, you must understand time before 9/11 and what was happening. And we can go back to, let's go to Waco incident. And I'm going to tie a bunch of different things in here, and you're going to understand what my 19 Keys book, when it comes out, how deep it's going to be. If we go to the Waco incident, it happened 4/19, right? It happened April 19th, and it was the murdering of people who had settled off colony of America, right? They wanted to gain their own sovereignty, and they believed that the guy that started, name was Koresh, And he believed that he was here to destroy Babylon, which would be America. And he believed that he was going to lead the true Israel, or the people back into the Jews into Israel, the true Jews. So anyway, let's pull past that. They killed all of those people. They murdered them in cold blood. The government went over there with almost 900 officers, right? And they went and murdered their own people. White people were against each other. Now, in order to understand that, you have to understand some deeper philosophies in Greek. You know what I mean? When you talk about time and you talk about one generation against the next. Because the elitist generation have never had this current generation in control, ever. That's not possible. Each generation has to be put into control once they're born, because each generation is born rebellious. Because when you're talking about rebellion, you're just talking about not born in the programming. So the rebellious generation, we can trace it back. Let's just start at Waco incident, April 19th. And remember that date. That's significant. Because another date of April 19th is when the Oklahoma bombing took place. White terrorism was rampant, right? So Timothy McVeigh was actually there at the Waco incident, and he's seeing how the government had treated those people that was on that ranch, and how they killed them all, and they slaughtered men, they slaughtered women, they slaughtered children. And after that, he was against the government. He actually wrote memoirs, and he was actually against the war in Iraq. And he was also against a lot of the government things that they had going on. So during the Oklahoma bombing, which happened April 19th, and he said that they asked him about 19 children that died during that incident. And they asked him, if you would have known about it, would you have stopped it? And he said no, because the date was too significant. And he said that you talk about those 19 children, but he said that there's children getting murdered and bombed in other countries like Iraq, and nobody's talking about those children. Isn't it the same thing? So you're talking about a generation of rebellion. Now, you have to understand the significance of Timothy McVeigh. He had one of the fastest executions in the history of executions. And he was actually executed 3 months before 9/11, 3 months to the date. So he was executed June 11th, right? 2001. That's when he was executed and he was murdered. Right? So white America had a white terrorist problem. You're talking about another incident that came from that is the school mass shootings. The Columbine incident, the children said that they were actually, right? They were actually motivated and inspired by Timothy McVeigh. So from Timothy McVeigh, he actually inspired school shootings. And this incident, as documented, occurred 10:19 a.m. Now, it's important to understand a lot of different incidents that was happening during that time, right? Because he blew up a government building. So when you understand time and the way things work, and you understand reality as you observe it, when you look at the elitists and their children, you're talking about them being against each other. The old generation against, right, the younger generation. Nobody really goes into a deep dive and talk about the differences that white people have with each other when you're talking about their conflict. Because in our mind, when we think of white supremacy, we think of white unity, but it's not all unified, because they are against their father and the father is against the son. That is the nature. The word chronos means it can mean an increment of time or a unit of time, and in Greek it talk about kairos, which means the opportune time. And the father of time was always shown as a white-haired, basically white man in Greek philosophy. And this represents the ravaging of time. And then Chronos represented someone who actually destroyed his own father, right? So it also comes from a word, chrono, which represents nature of mind. So when I come up with the idea of white patriarchal intellect, is representing that within time it reveals the nature of time, right? Because in Kabbalah it says that, you know, time is, the arrow of time is false. There's no forward and backward. The present and the future and all in the past are all happening all at once, right? Chronos killed his own children. Now in psychology, what's the main psychologist's name? I forget his name. The father of psychology out here. Freud. Freud talks about the Chronos complex. And there's another guy by the name of Robert L. White. No, not Robert L. White. I don't want to give y'all the wrong person because he talks about black psychology. But there's another person that talks about it. He wrote The Iceman Inheritance. This is some books that y'all should read. So when Freud talks about the Chronos complex, what he's talking about is the fact that white men always put their woman last, and she's seen as low within their society, right? So Frigman wrote about this because he says that the white man puts his son before his woman, right? And we know in numerology that consciousness represents 1. The male, the masculine represents 1. So in their patriarch, it would be 1-1. That's why I always connotate the 9/11 event and the buildings in significance as statues that represent, you know what I mean, the phallus symbols, right? The masculine, male minded. And in 9/11, what you see, and let me take y'all back to some 19s. So it was President Johnson. President Johnson was the one that instituted the commission to start the number 9/11 in America, right? And it was a commission of 19 people. 9/11, when 9/11 was instituted as a very significant date, they said it was 19 hijackers. The reason the number 19 is so significant because the number 19 reveals a representation of truth, right? So let's go back to 1995. 1995, I believe that's when the Waco incident happened at the same time as well. You had the Million Man March. At the Million Man March, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan opened up the Million Man March in front of over 2 million black minds. And he first talked about if you go watch that video, the first thing he talked about was the significance of the number 19 and how it represented the trade of the black bodies, right? So he connotated that to the actual phallus symbols in Washington and how one was 16 feet high and the other one was 3 feet high. I hope I'm getting this right. And that represented, and then it also represented the 16th president, the 3rd president, and how that come together to represent 19 or 19 feet high. Anyway, I hope I'm getting that part right, but y'all got to go watch the video for yourselves. But what he said was when the number 1 is next to the number 9, the number 9 represents that it's pregnant, right? The number 9 represents the womb. It represents the feminine. So when you put that 1 next to the 9, it is the revealing, right, of a truth or a secret. So the way I express the number 19 is in my interpretation when I go through my studies. When I find significant dates that are attached to the number 19, like what else happened on April 19th? Any of y'all know? I want y'all to understand this. So another thing that happened on April 19th was, so you're talking about the trade of the black bodies, and you're talking about the Central Park 5 incident. The Central Park 5 incident also happened on April 19th. Right? Now this is important to understand. Donald Trump said at one point in time when they said they thought it was a mistake, he talked about how the incident of 7/11 was terrible, right? He used the date 7/11. So if you go back to the Julius calendar, right, then I believe it's the Julius calendar. You go back to the old world time system, right? Then the numbers would have been changed. And 9/11 actually would have been, right, July 11th. So for me, I don't believe he was making a mistake. I think he was making a reference towards representing a new time. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But why is Trump significant in this? Because Trump played a significant impact in the Central 5 case. He was one of the main people that was going against those boys and telling them that they were guilty. They were guilty. He was a big proponent against them, only to later for them to be exonerated. You fast forward in time, Donald Trump, from this April 19th incident, right, and the trade of the black bodies and these young boys' innocence, guess what ended up happening? He ended up becoming president years later. So you find significant draws when you start to look at reality and how everything becomes interconnected and truth becomes revealed. Like at that time, nobody knew the significance or importance. Like, why the fuck is he even speaking out so much against this? Not knowing later on, this same man during that event to where he attached himself to a triggered event at 419 was able to later continue that perpetuation of that racist thought process within the nature of his mind and actually become a ruler within America. So this is that's a side note, really. That's really a sidebar. So as we understand 9/11, what happened after 9/11? You had Bush. Bush was known as the fumbling idiot president. But because after 9/11, the people were so fearful, their subconscious mind had been changed, because what they known as this powerful, impregnable country, right, of white supremacy has now been just hammered with the terrorist attack. And it was one attack that was actually witnessed all around the world. So what you do is, when you want to shift the paradigm and you have a world view, everybody's world view of it, that creates a fear and a panic, right? Remember, the markets went crazy that day, right? The shift of energy was crazy with so much fear in the air, right? With this fear, when you have fear, you can use fear to control people and get them to do things that are against their logic. That's why you talk about God consciousness, you're talking about rising above emotions into the thinking of a God. I'm out here in Vegas right now, right? And if you're in Vegas, everything in Vegas is to control you through your emotions, right? It's constant stimulation, right? So it's through the noise, the booms, the sounds of the slot machines. Because when it makes you feel a certain way, it can produce your drive and it can produce your action. So it can actually control you and move you. So now you're playing these slot machines, not even to actually win a thing, but just to produce a feeling. Because remember, when most people are playing and gambling, it's not about the money. Because when they win, what you do, you take that same money and you put it back in. It is a control method. The entire city of Las Vegas is about control. That's what it's all about. So we go back to after 9/11 happened and Bush, what'd he do? He was able to effectively market terrorism as a Muslim, right, and an Islamic thing, because he said that there was 19 hijackers that did this. Now, because everybody didn't believe this, right, you had Occupy Wall Street, because after Bush, people lost faith within the government. Right, because what they seen was an obvious portrayal, right, of government lies and deceit and technology. Right, the people was able to see the government the way black people seen it, basically. Right, so what ended up happening was he went over there, WMDs, right, fear, Homeland Security. Homeland Security allowed them to take away more rights at any other time in history than they've ever done, the same way they did during Hitler's time when he created a false flag, right, operation against his own people for the exact same reason, and it's written in history. Right, so after this, people start getting up all kind of privacy. And you see today we having an issue, right, with privacy and how that relates to our reality today and how it changed time and how it changed course of history, right, just from this one significant event. But logically, at first, people would have never allowed themselves to give up so much rights. But in the pimping industry, you the one that put the fear in the person, and then that person wants to be protected, but they come to you for protection against you. It's crazy pimping on the people. So that's kind of what the government did, is they created the fear, and then they said that, look, we need to protect you from the enemy that we created, not knowing the whole time that the government was the enemy. So the average person was like, no, we in the state red alert, you can come in my house, whatever you want to do. So they start signing in all these different legislations and orders and things of that nature, right? The Homeland Security Act took away and decimated the rights of people within America, effectively giving the government more power and giving the people less power. So when this was implemented and the people got less power, now you effectively become a slave. You give up all your rights. They can take you at any time they want to and go throw you into one of those jail cells and say it's because of Homeland Security. And the rest of the citizens will say, yes, cool, because we want to feel safe. Y'all can do whatever y'all want to. So that's the reason you go to airports now and things of that nature, and the whole security thing has been beefed up, right? That was more so effectively making it more a military state than anything, and them having more power, right, and control and ownership of everything. Import, export, foreigners, whatever it may be, as we see the way today is. So as we enter into this state, what does that do to the people, right? What does that do to the generation that grows up in that reality? So the generation that grows up in that reality, you're talking about the children, right? As the sister say, the fear destroys logic, but fear also effeminates you. It puts you in an effeminate state, right? It demasculizes you, and it makes you feel powerless, right? It makes you feel powerless. Now you feel like you have less power, so now you need somebody else to protect you. So when you can emasculate a people, right, and you can emasculate the children that grow up in that society, because they grew up in a world that is now built on fear, right? So now the children in that society and culture will represent the emotions, right? So then you've seen a change in hip-hop, right? The state of hip-hop change, right? And hip-hop carries culture. Hip-hop shifts culture. So hip-hop became a lot more effeminate after 9/11. Hip-hop became a lot more effeminate after 9/11. This is a fact. You can go look it up, right? So when you want to track something, you can clock the changes, right? This is how you know if a paradigm actually shifts. You go look for the things that used to be, and you look at the things that are. So you start to look at the language. You start to look at the frequency of the music. You start to look at the words that's used, the dress code, the fashion, the style. Effectively, most people don't remember, the world was an entire different place before 9/11. But such a huge shift like that creates an entire different dimension of reality that we currently live in, right? So now we living in hip-hop with Lil Uzis and Young Thuggers, right? And the current generation of children are more effeminate state. So they're not thinking with the conscious logic, God consciousness mind. No, they're thinking with more an effeminate, right, subconscious mind. They're more emotionally prone. So what I call this in the generation is the 9 minds, right? The young boys are more effeminate, and the young girls are more masculine, right? Because when the feminine energy can't be protected by the masculine energy, the feminine energy becomes masculine, right? So efficiently, it created a cosmic shift within a polarity of energies. And when you look at reality and what took place right after that, the slaughter of black bodies, right? So effectively, you had Mike Brown. Mike Brown was murdered in the streets, right? And when Mike Brown was murdered in the streets, they left his body in the streets. So when you talk about that incident that happened with Mike Brown, right? That very orchestrated incident, that became a global incident, right? That's when even white supremacy got behind Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was a group that was actually founded by LGBT community, right? Not only were they founded by the LGBT community, they were funded by the elite. Can y'all hear me? People trying to call. They were funded by George Soros. So George Soros is a billionaire, which represents the elitists. So I want to make my very logical connections. I don't want to leave nothing up to interpretation. You know what I'm talking about? Make sure y'all can hear me, right? I want to make sure y'all can hear me. Okay, cool. So after this, yeah, George Soros, he was the one that funded it. So after that public execution of that black body in the street, what does that do? It produces fear, right? Seeing that black body in the street produce fear in a lot of people, right? Seeing him get murdered, cold blood. And then after that, what did the news do? Because you got to remember what the news did after 9/11. They had fear everywhere, everything. They had a script, and everybody had to go off that script. All of the media had to go off that script. They had to utilize fear and certain trigger words consistently. You can go look up the videos and watch how all of them went through the same script. The same thing that happened after Mike Brown incident, right? Fear, right? So then the police killings went up. Now the Washington Post actually started tracking black bodies after that year, right? And they started tracking police killings because the FBI, even though the FBI track all other statistical data that don't really have nothing to do with anything, they weren't tracking police killings. So the Washington Post actually started tracking police killings, and they found out that the frequency of killings by police that year were going up, but the frequency of police deaths, meaning that the amount of police that died, went down, even though they increased the amount of police officers, right? So effectively, people stopped killing the police, right? And the police became more fearless, and the people became more fearful of the police, further implementing police state and further effeminizing the black man, especially, right? Because when you see murder and death of your people, it makes you feel powerless, and it puts you in that effeminate state, right? Puts you in that effeminate state. So as we seen, and it was everywhere, like even the news don't even show as much anymore the way it used to, because it fit their agenda at that time to just put it out, images at the images at the images, death at the death, murder at the murder, cell phone footage, video footage, everywhere, every day. It just felt like we getting attacked from all sides. The paradigm of fear was collapsing in. So what does that do when the male become fearful? Like you say, it emasculizes the female. So the women now, if you look at most of the new business owners are women, right? Because business is a masculine thing. It's a very logical thing. But it conceits to make women become more logical in their apprehension towards being protected by men and being provided by men, because now they're more in an effeminate state. So a lot of more women become business owners. A lot more women become significant, right? A lot more women. But you have to remember, after the Black Lives Matter, the women's movement rose as well, right? Because in 1995, it was the Million Man March. But just this year, right, January 2019, it was what? It was the Women's March. The women represents the subconscious mind. The year of the number 19 represents the year of the subconscious, or the year of the feminine, right? The rise of the feminine. A nation can only rise so high as its woman. So even though in that agenda, everything has to be within structure and order. Everything has to be in structure and order. So when I talk about the Godriarch, and I talk about how it can't be just a man and a man, it can't be a woman behind you. It has to be man and woman ruling side by side, because that is the death of white patriarchy, is black man and black woman ruling side by side. But let's go back. I digress on that point for a second, and I bring it back to the forefront of thought process of saying, how did black men and black women become so separate during this time between 9/11 and now, right? Because you have to remember, during the Black Lives Matter, right, you had the LGBT, who actually were the one who spearheaded that whole campaign, and they were funded by the elitist George Soros, and a lot of them become the activists and leaders and the so-called revolutionaries today, right? The one person that they left out of that was the black man, out of the Black Lives Matter. And you can go read on their site at that time, and I'm not sure if it's still up, but they was basically saying that this wasn't for the black man, right? Because that's not what it was about. It was either a woman's inclusion agenda or LGBT inclusion or agenda. And if you look at the state of reality right now, you can tell by that. So it effectively gave them more power, and it allowed them to intersect their agenda with black issues, right? With the black crises, right? So now you have the man becoming effeminate, and the LGBT gaining in power, and then the women's rights movement starting to rise. So now, even if I look at language, I pay very close attention to language. If a person is talking about, let's say a black woman talking about support, she gonna say, I'm gonna support either a black business or a woman-owned business, right? And then in the subconscious of her mind, she says that I'm also gonna support a gay business, because she now represents that these are oppressed groups that are intersected. Now the black man doesn't recognize that, because he haven't seen inclusionary or intersection or help from any of these groups. To me, a white gay man is still just a white man who like other white men, or like black men. And this is a big problem as well, because you have to understand the fundamental history of exocannibalism, right? Which is the consumption of human energy of flesh. And the white man has always deified, right, the energy and the black energy of the black man. And I can break down some history as well, to where the reason that they wanted to murder black men, because they believed the same way they did in ancient times or in slavery times, because they believed that by consuming the flesh that they actually gain the power and the spirit of the one that they consume. So when you see them murdering, they believe that they become more powerful than the one that they murdered, and they leave them in the street to consume that power, right? So it's very important when you understand the ritualistic behavior of a people and the nature of their mind, right? Because this is not something that a person has to theorize. This is history. We've seen them burning black people at a stake and having picnics and eating hot dogs right next to it, right? There's a history of sex farms and slavery where they had homosexual farms where they used to do buck breaking, and the white slave masters used to rape black men. There's in history, but they did it because not even just for the sexual aspect of it, for the energetic ritualism of the exo-cannibalism that was taking place during that time to effectively emasculate those men. In slavery time, in order for them to effectively make a man a slave, you have to first emasculate him so he doesn't want power. And if he doesn't want power, he has to come to you for that protection. So he becomes a boy. He is no longer a man, and that boy can be controlled because a man is a representation of one who is in his full production of his mind, the maturity of his mind. Man represents mind, right? Boy doesn't. So, yes, somebody said, okay, but this is 2019. So in 2019, let's look at reality as it is today. Today, you have black men who willingly go have sex with white men, and then those same black men are praised and in a protected class today, right? But how can we utilize someone who is sleeping with the enemy the same way you have these women these black women who are sleeping with white women? So where's the black family within that? The effectiveness of separating the black man and the black woman makes sure that they cannot create the Godriarch, or they cannot have a black family order. And without the black family, you cannot produce a nation. And without a nation, you cannot have rulership, workforce, and power, right? Which means you don't actually have a future, which means that any progress that is made by the current generation, right, means nothing unless it is passed down through intergenerational wealth. Then the wealth is not just the accumulation of assets like resources of land, right, and other things, but it's also the intellect. So this is a very important aspect of the control agenda of 9/11 and how things, right, manifested in the reality that we have as it is today. Because I promise you, more important than most people find, they find the LGBT and the women's movement much more important than the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement effectively just represents black man and black woman. So the person that is left out is the man, right? So the man represents mind, but that man, that masculine man, also represents God. The masculine black man represents God. So you're talking about the death of the black God and the rise of the white God and the continuation of his power as a white God, but also the dwindling of his numbers. So when a white man doesn't have this power anymore, he doesn't even have the numbers to maintain the majority rule. So when he doesn't have the physical bodies, he has to control the mind, which means that he has to make sure the mind is in an effective, effeminate state. He has to make sure that this mind is in an effeminate state to be able to control and rule, because he has lost the power to procreate. So he finds artificial ways, artificial intelligence, artificial insemination. He is an artificial man, right? He's the classic man versus the original man. That's why you see Jidena serving that agenda. Oh, that boy dropped some bars on that one. That boy dropped some bars on that one. But I digress. So as we look at it today, you have many of the boule, as people say, and like I said earlier, I broke down on 419s already. I went crazy on the 419s. Matter of fact, I might have to share those with you, Blue Pill. I'm not sure if you was there earlier when I broke down on 419s, and I'll share those with you later, because you might have been in here. But as we look at the significance of 9/11 and the transition of time, you have to understand that time was effectively instituted, right, in an artificial capacity, I believe around 1582, with the institution of the clock, right? Meaning that white patriarchal intellect has ruled over the minds of the people because they got everybody on the one world time system. When Okay, so I'm gonna get you. So it got everybody on the one world time system, meaning that we're living within their mind, which means that this is out of the function of our time, right? So when you say it's the white man's time, you mean in the literal mentalist sense that this is his intellect that controls our time. We go by his calendar, right? We get the bag, man. You a sucker, blood. Let me get you out of here, man. I don't even talk to suckers. Some people got to be left out. You know what I'm talking about? Everybody can't grow. Everybody can't go. So the crazy thing about this entire conversation is you see how weak the mind is. It fights against itself. Now, one time, even though black people are amazingly great, and if you break down the words, if you go to Honorable Elijah Muhammad in 1933, which, you know, time the nation was founded, more so in 1933, Honorable Elijah Muhammad talked about the tribe of Shabazz, which represents a great people, because you can break down Shabazz to Shab and Ibn and Az, right, which represents a great people, because that is not actually a word that was actually, the technosphere about Jose Arguellas. Yeah, you know I'm about to get to the Ethiopian calendar. So that is not an actual word that you can find and have the same definition, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was representing a great people. And as a great people, we are a scientific and engineering and technologically savvy people. We are a people whose nature of mind is that of God, right? If you go to the jungles of Africa and you find the pygmy people, you're going to find them living within nature. Right, so you find that people living within nature, mental illness doesn't persist within nature. It persists within the city and mass machinations, because our reality is against our circadian rhythm, right? So when you're talking about that, you're talking about the improper digestion of light. But I digress. Let me get back on point. So you're talking about the pygmy people over there. All they do is hunt, they have sex, they dance, right? And they take care of family, order, and structure, and they have zero crime. So that's a people that you can observe that is living within their nature, right? And because those people are so magical, that some of the surrounding tribes that are supposedly civilized actually tries to commit cannibalism against those people, right? Because they believe that they're so magical. And this is actually where you get the leprechaun myths, right? So I digress, and then let me go back to the nature and the mind that we're dealing with that can institute such a large-scale agenda such as 9/11, when they work with egregors and hive minds. And if we have the institution of thought to believe that they have procreated such a thought unto our reality and produced it, then we must say, why can't the gods do the same thing? So when we talk about 1019, us coming together to serve a collective agenda, we can't even get most people to actually take a airplane trip to come in there and voice what they want this agenda to be, to listen to it and work together with this. But we believe that white patriarchal intellect can institute an agenda that spans over a millennial of time, only to change and shift their time, right? We believe that they have the ability to create Kabbalistic and geometrical, right, agendas embedded into, right, their reality, and continue to maintain control. But what about the gods? If they come from us, don't we have the same ability to do, just with the righteous institution, right? So for us, the goal is, what is the collective agenda? Because next year will be 2020, will be 19 years from 9/11, right? The vision 2020, you can see clearly what came from 9/11. 2020, you'll be able to see clearly the technology, your rights, the rules, right, the control, everything. But this world is fighting, and the white man's world is crumbling. And when I say white man's, I mean his mind. I mean the patriarch of his mind, which is why you had these women's agendas that were so against white man and things of that nature, because the very crumbling of the intellect that built this society is falling down, and it cannot be held up anymore, right? So we must go back to the nature of our mind, and we must get back together. So I'm going to go over this last point, and then I'm going to get off. Blue pill. So I went over the 419s, and I'm not going to go over a full production of thought. But 419, Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma building. And 419, the Waco incident happened when it was raided by the police and they killed all those people. And also 419, you had, of course, the exonerated 5, as I'm gonna call them now, right? And I interconnected all of those different things on how they actually were all a part of the paradigm shift of 9/11. And I went over those 419s, man. We went crazy with those, though. I ain't gonna lie. Yeah, I mean, in 2019, of course, I was able to crown one of those exonerated 5. And in 2019, of course, Trump, one of the ones who were the main proponents against them during that time, right, is now president of the United States. Because synchronicity and understanding any numerology, because the universe is made out of numbers, everything in the universe has a mathematical component to it and a mathematical measurement to it. So when you observe the numbers, you observe synchronicity, and synchronicity is finding meaning in the otherwise meaningless. But only high observers can find meaning in the meaningless, because it takes a high level of energy to be able to interpret the signs and decode reality in the way that it is. And if you find any great leader, they all understood numerology, they understood the numbers, they understood synchronicity, they understood reality in these different aspects. And Adam has measurements of number, a cell, everything within our reality can be mathematically defined. Two scientists who are speaking different languages can speak the language of mathematics and understand the same variations of the universe by looking at each other's math, right? They cannot know each other. They can be separated by eons of time and language and culture. But when you put the math in front of them, it is a different language. It is a universal language. It is the language of truth. And the number 19 is the number 19 that represents all numbers, because the number 19, right, it has the single digit, one digit number, lowest digit number, and it has the highest single digit number. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that every number between 1 through 9, if you took a scale just like a pyramid, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, those are all just ones. The 9 is just a representation of ones. So when a person says that I am number 1, somebody else can be number 1 too, and another person can be number 1, because we are all ones. And then geometrical value of the number 19, guess what it is? It's 1, baby. You know what I mean? So I'm in my bag today. You know what I mean? I'm in my bag today. I think y'all got enough. You know what I mean? But I wanted to break some of that down, man, because we move forward, though. We move forward. And the reason I break that down as well is because I don't learn things so that they become impractical digestion. I learn things so that the awareness allows me to have power. And in this awareness of power, I can move forward instead of having trigger dates like 9/11, because if you don't know the meaning of something, you can't move past it. You become triggered by it and you get stuck in a time loop. But we move forward when we know the depths of this devil, and then we also know that God must be even deeper than that. And if we see their abilities, then we know our abilities, because they knew their abilities by knowing ours. They studied us and made us forget us, and then they knew what was possible based on what we have done. Right? Come on now, talk to me. Talk to me. So, the alignment of your mind being back within your conscious mind, being controlled by the seat house of reason, and logic is God consciousness, because everything in reality is done with meaning. Everything in nature is done with meaning. Nothing in nature is without meaning, because everything is based off logic, right? Which is mathematical soundness, mathematical mindedness. If a person can keep you distracted, then they can keep you from getting into the deeper recesses of your mathematical thinking, because the introvert type, the INTJ type, is the mathematical thinker. The one who can be without the impact of social rhythm, right? And the social digestion at all times, right? Where his mind is distracted. You can sit in a room by yourself, as Derek Gray said. You can sit in your room until you do that homework, and then you come out to have fun. But if you can't sit by yourself, control self, and have discipline over the nature of your mind, you cannot go into the deeper inner recesses of your mind. In nature is where you find your creativity. That allows you to travel within your mind, right? That's that time you need to spend alone, and you need to go within your mind and pull up those thoughts, right? But without our people thinking, without our people dreaming, without our people visioning, they have nothing great to execute, because all planning requires thought, and thought requires focused energy. The rest of the time, we're not really thinking. Our mind is on just autopilot. But intentional thought requires intentional thinking, which means that that energy has to go directly to that point, and you start diving deeper into self. And self is an infinite space. An infinite space. The universe expanding. The universe, Y-O-universe, right? The U-verse, right? That one verse, or that 19 verse, however you want to put it, that conscious and that subconscious. But if we are an imbalanced people, you can never have abundance. And if there's no abundance, you can never have wealth. No wealth, you can never have power, right? So the exertion of our inner God to produce our will onto reality creates the production of a new time and a new reality. And I'm going to leave y'all with this. In the Ethiopian calendar, the Ethiopian calendar didn't go by the Julius calendar, because theirs represented the sun and the moon. This one only represents the sun, right? And their calendar represents the sun and the moon. It represents masculine and feminine, because we know the effect that the moon has on the tides of the woman, right? So we can't just talk about the sun, right, without the moon, because there's 9, right, that circles 1, right? It's 9 that circles 1. You're talking about the planet. You're talking about the universe. You're talking about everything with being in a mathematical. You're talking about the I forgot what it's called, but I think it's called synodic period. Every 19 years, the sun, the moon, and the earth line up every 19 years, and everything follows that 1 and that 9 rhythm. That 1 and that 9 rhythm. Right? Because that 1 represents that conscious, but that 9 represents that flow. So when you talk about, even in astrology, that the planets having a sway on you, right? You're talking about that 9. Everything follows that 9. So you have to understand mathematics to understand the reality and the connection between all things, from the planets, from the stars, the language, right? So yeah, I'll break that down. Well, I probably won't be. Yeah, the Metonic cycle. My brother A&B Sims, he know what he talking about, man. The Metonic cycle, man. I got everything in my notes. Oh yeah, I will break that down to how the moon represents the woman. But in the Ethiopian calendar, man, that's what they have 13. So they have it's separated with additional days, right? Because the moon goes around the earth 13 times within a cycle. So, you know, white patriarchal intellect said, fuck that, we just gonna represent us, the sun. You know what I mean? Because them niggas is gay. But, so, you have the Baha'i people who every 19 days, they actually have a feast, right? And in their calendar, they have a calendar of separated between, I believe, 19 months, and 19-day weeks. And it's supposed to be one of the closest calendars, right, that you can get to as far as a 365 spectrum. So you can even put the rhythm on the number 19. And the number 19 was, if you understand, the Mayan calendar, we live on a decimal system, right? The 1 and the O, right? Because that 1 and the O just adds up to that 1. Like I said, man, everything in their mathematics is just representing the man. But that 1 and the 9 and the Mayan calendar is a decimal system. A decimal system is represent that 1 and 0. But if you were to count through the Mayan, you will go through 1 through 9, or you'll go through 19 and then start over. But we go to 20 because we do everything by decimals. 10 points, 10 points, 10 points, right? So it even puts your mind in a different rhythm away from nature, right? So you have to understand these things, and you have to understand that our reality is an artificial digestion, and the point was to get you away from the rhythm of your nature, because when you're off the rhythm of your nature, you don't have balance, right? Polarity is rhythm, right? That's why black people got so much rhythm. You know what I'm talking about? We be moving, White people ain't got that rhythm. They ain't got no balance, right? So the nature doesn't have to have control. Nature is wild, right? Nature is wild, right? Nature expresses itself. It is wild, but it is meaningful. Everything within nature is wild, but people whose nature is to control other people, right? It's not about balance. It's not about rhythm. It's about control. But as us, black people, black-minded, melanated original people of this planet Earth, indigenous people in our land and wherever the hell we are. It's about us having rhythm. So as we live in America, we have the American mind and we have the white mind, right? Because the white mind would be more so representing the Eurocentric aspect of our thinking, given that we grew up out here, and then we have the Afrocentric, given our spiritual, but on here we have the mental. And in the mental, we're talking about these are the things we do for our ambitions. The spiritual is talking about what we do for aspirational goals, right? So you're talking about how you have to monetize your talents, right? Rather than just being able to enjoy for happiness, right? So you have to marry these things. You have to be able to think with business logic, even through the expression of your spirit, so that you can actually find what you like to do and what you're good at. And when we find that rhythm in between these two thinkings, then we find a way to where we can have our abundance and our power, and therefore we can create our workforce and our rulership, and then we can have power within this paradigm. But nothing matters. And when I say matters, we're talking about materialization. And when you're talking about matter, you're talking about light, right? Because all matter is light. So you're talking about bringing things to light. So when you're talking about Black Lives Matter, you're talking about Black lives are matter, for one. We are light. When you see the melanin, this is light, right? But when you're talking about that, you're talking about the materialization of our world coming into fruition only by the rhythm of the man and the woman being together, and the black family household being in healthy production as it's supposed to be. However we do it, by any means necessary. I don't care if you gotta go polygamous. That's what y'all. But yeah, man, y'all be blessed. I appreciate y'all for tapping in. But before you get, so my new book will be coming out at some point in time, inshallah, later this year. But make sure you get Paradigm Keys, the book that I just dropped, because that's going to prepare you for the next one. You might as well not even get the new one until you get the Paradigm Keys. The Paradigm Keys is going to prepare your mind, right, for the 19 keys. And then the 19 keys going to be next level. Right, so it's gonna have this information, much more solution-based thinking, all kind of stuff in there, man. But I'm done. I'm about to go meet up with my good brother Derek, man. We're about to go talk some business, man. I appreciate y'all for tapping in. Y'all just enjoyed the good 19 keys decoding session on 9/11. Year of the Keys 2019, man. Go unlock your destiny. Peace.